Memphis, 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 Memphis. Nothing but Memphis. Everywhere we go, it's Memphis.
Welcome to On the Bluff, a Bluff City Media audio podcast. Stepping up to the microphone are your hosts, Kenny Stubblefield and Christian Fowler. Now, let's get to the show. Welcome back to Bluff City Media's On the Bluff, episode number 2. My name is Kenny Stubblefield. I am the chief lead digital content creator for Bluff City Media, and I got my co-host with me, Christian Fowler. What's going on, brother?
Oh, nothing much. Got a better lit room this week for you to make sure I look a little bit better this week. Kenny caught me off guard with that one.
Yeah, this man called me up afterwards and was like, man, I feel like I'm in a hostage video, man. Like, I got to get a better room.
So I've switched to my sister's room, who just got married, and her room is emptied out and is now my podcast studio. So,
well, Christian, we had kind of promised last week that this week's show was going to look a little bit different. Obviously, it doesn't look. The only thing that's different about it now is that you're in a better lit room. But we got some plans for the future, man. Like, we couldn't make it happen this week, but you're going to see this in a HD, in-person, live format extremely soon. And we're excited about this, right?
oh, dude, I can't wait. I love it. I feel like it's always more difficult to record over Zoom, and I think a lot of people have gotten used to it, but I still hate it, and I've hated it since we had to start doing it. So I can't wait to actually do an in-person podcast. I think the last one we did is when we were, I don't even know, it was like football stuff. I think it was me and Gabe was the last time I did anything in person.
Right.
So it's been a long time. So I'm ready to get back in person. Haven't seen Kenny in over a year in person. So,
well, we're going to change that soon. But yeah, man, hey, listen, we're recording this on Monday afternoon. After the Tigers had their season opening home game against VCU, the VCU Rams. Man, obviously got a lot to talk about in terms of basketball. We had, since the last time we recorded, the Tigers have played 2 games. They played St. Louis, in St. Louis, and then came back home to play VCU. They went 1-1 in those 2 games. Christian, did you get a chance to watch the game last night? What were your thoughts about the Tigers season opener at home?
yeah, it seems like we were right in our first podcast talking about the Vanderbilt game, that it's going to be a good defensive team that offensively follows Kendric Davis. I mean, that was to a T what the game was against VCU last night. St. Louis, not so much. And I think I know we did a little bit of a preview of that St. Louis game. We kind of hit the nail on the head with it was going to be a tough matchup, that St. Louis had some very good offensive players, and you hit on Yuri Collins. I talked about Gibson Jimerson. I feel like I say that name wrong every single time. But he obviously ripped the Tigers from 3, and they came back against VCU and only allowed 47 points in the home opener. So I want to get your thoughts on it, obviously, but first, give me the thoughts on the court and the new jerseys, and then give me your thoughts on the game.
Yo, you know what, man? Like, obviously, let's be real about it. That court that the Tigers had prior to this season rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I kind of liked it. I liked the second version of it more so than the first. The first version, there was someone forgot to go to the top of the arena and look down at the court before they signed off on it. All you have to do is just go Google Memphis FedEx Forum home court, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So obviously when they kind of fixed that and just changed the shade of color on certain parts of the actual court, it made it look a little bit better. I will say this, man, live and in person, the previous court looked really good. On TV, it didn't look great. And so I am excited. I was excited to hear that the Tigers were going to get back to kind of a more conventional hardwood, kind of brown, deep brown color, but then they obviously put their little claw marks in it at the half court. Man, I liked it. I think it looks good. I think it really, honestly, it brightens up the FedEx Forum a lot. And especially for somebody who is filming and doing video work, it makes it nice that it's a little bit brighter in there. You get a better quality footage. But the jerseys, dude, I loved them. a lot. I really, when I saw the pictures that the Memphis basketball Twitter handle and Instagram that they were putting out, I was like, man, that's going to be something to get used to. But in person, those things were fire. What'd you think?
I like them a lot better than the ones they wore in the first game against Vanderbilt. I'm not a huge fan of the blue and black stripes. I don't like jerseys that aren't legible from far away.
Right.
And like especially with football, because if you're in the press box, you can't see anything. You can't tell which numbers are what. Obviously, basketball is a little bit different because you get to be on the floor and you can see a little bit better. But I hate jerseys that aren't legible. TV, if you're any kind of distance away, right. I don't like not being able to read the names and the numbers and everything. But last night's uniforms, I was a big fan of. I agree with you on the court. I like the court a lot better. I think when they redid it, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago now?
It was the 2019 year.
2019 season. So at first it was like, oh, it's cool, this is different. And then I just got tired of it. Like I got tired of seeing the gray and the blue, and it was just like, okay. And I'm not a traditionalist. Anybody that's listened to me in the past knows I'm not a traditionalist. Like I like switching things up. I like new stuff, but I got tired of that court quick. So I like kind of the mix of, something a little bit different with the claw mark, but also having like some of the traditional hardwood. Liked it way better. But anyway, let's talk about this. Let's talk about St. Louis and VCU. What was the difference? I mean, this is a team that allowed 90 points against St. Louis and then came back a few nights later and held VCU to 47 at home. So what are some of the things that you saw differently, whether the scheme, effort, whatever it is, rotations, what led to what is that, a 40 point difference, 43 point difference in just a couple of nights?
Right. Yeah. Big difference in points. I would say being there, obviously I think the biggest thing is that it looked like Kendric Davis was back to kind of what we had expected him to be, what we've seen him when he was at SMUB, and that's that explosive, dynamic point guard who can literally just get buckets and run a team. Against St. Louis, he looked a little bit hobbled. Obviously the narrative is out there about his ankles over these last, few months, and anybody that's played sports before understands how just ankle injuries just linger and linger and linger. We've seen it with Alex Lomax. I mean, Alex has been dealing with the same ankle injuries for the last, 2 to 3 years at this point, to the point where he had to have surgery after, during this offseason. But I think for me, what I noticed, more so than anything was just, it looked like Kendric Davis was, a little bit more explosive, a little bit more spry, to the point where it felt like he was he recognized that he needed to dominate the ball and get up the majority of the shots in this VCU game. He was deferring a little bit, I think, in the St. Louis game. Obviously, DeAndre Williams led the team in scoring in the St. Louis game, had 21 points. Kendric got a lot of his points at the free throw line late. He didn't score a whole lot. And when he did shoot, he didn't shoot the ball real well. But Kendric Davis, I think for me, was the biggest difference in this VCU game. Is and you've said this in the last 2 weeks. As goes Kendric, so goes the Tigers in terms of what they're going to do this year. So for me, that was a big deal. Obviously, Penny made some lineup changes, but I don't know. I truly don't know how much of a difference those lineup changes made. I don't know if they're really that big of a deal. I think for me, the biggest thing was Kendric.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I asked you a question about the defense, and you talked 0% about the defense. So
did you ask me about defense? My bad.
Yeah. No,
we can talk about defense too.
Yeah, we'll talk about defense. No, yeah, Kendric Davis played a great game, and like you said, the second leading scorer in both games. I think DeAndre led the team in scoring in the first 2 games.
Right.
In both of the first 2 games, and Kendric was right there, maybe a point or two shy of him overall, but it was pretty inefficient. Like he wasn't shooting good from the floor. It's not. I don't think he was necessarily taking bad shots. He just wasn't hitting them. But he comes back on Sunday night, and in this game I think he shot 50% from the floor.
Right.
So a huge improvement there. Yeah, 2 of 6. He wasn't great from 3, but he was 50% from the floor overall. So big improvement there just in his efficiency. also moving the ball really well. We know what he brings to the table as far as just a passer, and he really showed that. I think he showed probably his best performance as a passer in Memphis so far. He had a couple good passes in the first game against Vanderbilt, but just as far as moving the ball and controlling the offense, I think he did a good job. Memphis didn't put up a ton of points in this game. They only put up 62 points in this game. So I think, there can be a lot of nitpicking, whether that be shot selection, whether it just be shots falling. But in my opinion, and probably in most people's opinion, the biggest thing is the turnovers were back. They were pretty careful with the ball in the first 2 games, and then they come back with 18 turnovers against VCU, despite playing so well defensively. So it was kind of that old Memphis narrative that we've seen over the past several years that we really didn't see pop up in the first 2 games, and what I mean by that is, for the past 2 or 3 years, it's been really good defense, but allow the other team to stay in the game because you're turning the ball over so much. Fortunately, this was just an absolutely ridiculous defensive performance where you don't even allow your opponent to go over the 50-point mark. So that didn't rear its head as much as it has in the past. But I think that was the biggest thing that slowed the offense down. We know and we've seen it firsthand over the years that if you have, what do you think, 14, 15 plus turnovers, then the rhythm is really slowed down offensively. You're not able to get in that rhythm. You're not able to move the ball the way you want to. You're not able to get the shots you want to. And I think that's what we saw offensively in this game. But going back to that, to defense, because I do want to hit on that. What are some of the differences you saw in this game between the St. Louis game? Because they got shredded in that game. They allowed 90 points in that game against St. Louis, and they come back and hold VCU to 47. So what were the differences in that? Why did that happen?
Well, I think that might be where those lineup changes came into effect. You see Chandler Lawson starting, you see Jayden Hardaway starting. And for all of the struggles that those guys might have on the offensive end of the floor, they are solid to legitimate defenders. For Penny, they've played under him for a long time. Penny has said this from the very beginning when Chandler was, came onto the team last year, that Chandler was his best communicator on defense, that he's the guy that kind of quarterbacks the defense when he's out there. And I think you saw that a lot. You didn't see a lot of rim runs. You didn't see a lot of screen and rolls where the on-ball defender and the screen guy's defender, the post guy would get kind of locked up. There was really good communication, and I think a lot of that came from Chandler. His line is great, man. He shot the ball twice, made one, but rebounded the ball really well, had 5 defensive rebounds. He got the fouls that he needed to get. He only turned the ball over 1 time. But I feel like that might be where some of those changes that were made on from the St. Louis game to this VCU game might have been the most difference making, is that he put in players that he knew he could trust on defense, and they got after VCU big time. It definitely, there was times where it just felt like VCU just couldn't get a shot off. They just couldn't get a shot off. And when you sacrifice, I think, a little bit of offensive continuity when you have a guy like Chandler or have a guy like Jayden, who, even though Jayden scored points, he got a couple of buckets off, hit a 3, made another bucket, I think, in either a dunk or a layup. You still definitely, knowing that they had just gotten shredded for 90 points by St. Louis in this game, Kendric Davis even said it after, the game. He said, man, Penny was up in about defense after the St. Louis game. This whole week was all about defense, which, if Penny, that's what he normally does in practice anyway, is a lot of defensive stuff. So it's not surprising they came out and really held VCU, down pretty well during this game.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what you expect. Like you said, if Penny's team gets ripped for 90 points, he's going to emphasize defense heavily, and more than likely the team's going to come out and have a good defensive performance in the next game because they don't want to go through that again. So that I think that's a lot of what we saw in this game. But there are 2 things, once again, I know we're only 3 games in, but there's 2 things that I want to talk about and kind of get your thoughts on moving forward and what it does, over the next several weeks and into the meat of the season. First thing is Alex Lomax. We saw him play, honestly, one of his best games in a Memphis uniform, the first game of the year against Vanderbilt. and he's been pretty cold since. He hasn't been a big factor offensively. We know what he brings to the floor defensively, but hasn't shot the ball well and hasn't done some of the Alex Lomax things that we're used to seeing. And I feel like this has been a conversation in the past, and it usually gets overblown, right? Like usually
100%.
people start getting on Alex pretty heavily, and it doesn't seem merited. And I'm not necessarily even saying it's merited right now or that we're getting on him. I'm just curious on your thoughts on it and how it plays out the rest of the season. But with some of these guys that Penny has brought in, like Elijah McCadden and Keontae Kennedy, and some of these bigger guards that they have, obviously still waiting on a couple of other guys to get freed up and to see if they'll be available. And I don't, that obviously changes the lineup if and when that happens. But does Alex kind of see his role shift with some of these, veteran guys that Penny brought in, or, is he just in a slump right now?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things that we know about Penny is that he plays who he trusts, and he absolutely trusts Alex Lomax implicitly. They're father-son, basically. The narrative is out there about how long Alex has played with Penny and just that relationship. But I think when Penny went out and got Kendric Davis, he didn't know if Alex was going to come back. Alex was in the midst of a surgery, recovery, trying to figure out if he was going to come back for his final season. But when Alex did make the decision to come back, I think the narrative that the idea was that we would absolutely see Alex's role change, more than likely a situation where Alex would be the backup point guard to Kendric Davis. Now, the problem is Kendric Davis plays 35 to 40 minutes of every single game. So if you got to get Alex minutes, if you want to get Alex minutes, then a lot of times you're going to see them two playing on the court together. And I think what we've seen is the Tigers struggle when both of them are on the floor, when they have a bigger guard that they're having to play against, when they're getting, there is a level of, the size differential there that's going to be tough, especially as they get into conference play, coming up against, some of these teams like Texas A&M, like Auburn, like Alabama. They're going to have to, have some of these bigger guys. I just don't think that at this point, Penny has seen enough from Elijah McCadden and Keontae Kennedy to say, yes, we need to get Alex, these guys can come in and step in and take over that role that Alex has. I think if DeMaria Franklin gets eligible soon, that we'll see a drastic difference in the roles there, because DeMaria Franklin is that guy. For all intents and purposes, what we're hearing out of the facility is that DeMaria is one of the top two to three players on the team right now, that he is just a fantastic player on both ends of the court. But I still think that we're going to see Alex Lomax. I still think we're going to see Alex Lomax play. Will it hurt the Tigers? Possibly, because he's just not an offensive player. But that's why Penny went out and got Kendric. So it's different, man, because we know how much Penny likes to play players that he trusts. But what's the best benefit for the Tigers in terms of their roster? How many minutes? Who does Alex play with? Those kinds of things. We don't have the answer to that just yet, I don't think. And I think Penny's still searching for that.
Yeah, I kind of chalk it up right now to more of Alex has just been in a slump over the past two games. Because like I said, he played a very good game against Vanderbilt. Him and Kendric Davis looked really good on the floor together. And Vanderbilt's not a small team necessarily. They have some bigger guards and bigger wings. So I'm not going to sit here and say, like, this is it. Like, this is the time that Alex Lomax finally gets pulled. I don't think that at all.
It's not going to happen.
No, not at all. And more honestly, it's just trying to get out in front of the narrative, because, you give Alex Lomax one more bad game and everybody will be clamoring for it. And then he'll turn it around and be Alex Lomax again. So, like, it's happened literally every year that he's been at Memphis. It probably has. But I mean, at this point, we know who Alex Lomax is. He's a very high level defensive guard who has limitations on offense. And that is what it is, and that's fine. He's still a good player, and I think we've always kind of kept that sentiment that, you know, he's not perfect, and he's definitely not going to light up the scoreboard, but he's going to do the dirty work. He's going to be the Draymond Green type player that doesn't have a ton of points, but he has the rebounds, he has the assists, he has some of those things that aren't in the box score. So that's kind of what I think on that. Do you have something else?
Yeah, I just think that I think Tiger fans need to get a little bit more nuanced in what are good minutes for a player, right? Like understanding that there might be some shots off, there might be some missed shots, that he might take some shots that, you know, that don't go in. He might take shots that make you, you know, shake your head a little bit and say, why is he doing that? But that's just kind of who he is at this point. I have never once seen Alex Lomax play in a game, and there's probably fans that are going to send me highlights of games that are going to say, here's the game, here's the game, here's the game. I have never once seen him in a game just totally take over all the shot taking that is happening for the Tigers. Like he doesn't go in and jack up 20 shots when DeAndre Williams or whoever else. Now he has got a backcourt player with Kendric Davis that's going to be taking the majority of the shots, that is going to dominate the ball. But a guy like Alex, who is a decent enough ball handler, can run the offense well, make passes that need to be made. And then the best thing he does is he just defends extremely, extremely hard, extremely well. And so when you look at an Alex Lomax game, instead of going straight to the field goals and the field goals attempted and field goals made, you've got to watch the game and kind of look at the other things that he does. Should he ever be the leading scorer for the Tigers? No, that's not his game. But I think that's one of the reasons why Penny went out and got Kendric Davis, is to take some of that pressure and alleviate some of that ball handling and shot taking pressure off of him, and just allow him to do what he needs to do. Because it's very clear, man, Penny trusts him. And so, you know, there's things that he does on the court that really, really help the team. And I think the level of like what our eyes see as fans needs to change in regards to Alex, that it's not about field goals attempted and field goals made, that it's about what the intangible things that he does on the court that gets the Tigers in a smooth offensive possession or shuts down somebody on the defensive end of the floor. Those are the things that I think he does, and he does it well.
Completely agree. And shifting gears a little bit, like I said, I had two things I kind of wanted to talk about to see what you think on what will happen with these things over the next, few weeks and into the season. The second thing is the front court. It's something that was talked about a lot in the offseason because Memphis didn't make many moves in the front court outside of Cal. Cal. What
K-O.
I said it wrong.
You said it Cal last time, but it's Ko. Yeah.
Ko.
I'm going to give you till next week. I'm going to give you till next week to say his full name on this podcast.
No, do not do that.
I interviewed him when he announced that he was coming here. I interviewed him.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you, man, I spent a lot of time thinking of questions and trying to like really dive deep into into his psyche and what he was all about. I spent literally probably about an hour trying to figure out his name. And I think I butchered it within the first minute of talking to him. I
probably did.
I was like, did I get this right? And he's like, you try. Good try, brother.
You got close. So that was really the only front court addition. And then you bring back Malcolm Dandridge and DeAndre Williams. And we haven't seen it hurt Memphis too badly yet. And I don't know if it will. That's kind of where I'm at right now is like, do they play bad in the game where they need them, or do they just have, subpar games and games that they're already winning? And DeAndre Williams has played really well, but something that you talked about in the last episode was just the physicality and having kind of that imposer and kind of having that bodyguard. And Malcolm Dandridge is expected to kind of lean into that role. Looked really good against Vanderbilt and hasn't been as consistent in the last two games. And so I'm just curious your thoughts on, does it come back to bite Memphis at some point in the season? Do they get it figured out? What happens with this front court moving forward?
It is the biggest question coming into this season for me, is when they get into the meat of the season and they start playing conference opponents and they start playing these bigger opponents that they're going to go up against. is how is the front court going to hold up? And I think for me, the biggest sign that I've seen that the reason it hasn't been exposed yet is because DeAndre Williams has stayed out of foul trouble. That's the only reason at this point, I think, because you're right. Like Malcolm had a really good game against Vanderbilt and has in spurts kind of showed, which is he showed who he can be or who he is in the St. Louis game and against VCU as well. But I think that's what we can expect from Malcolm moving forward, because that's been his MO since he's been at Memphis. He'll have spurts of just dominant play and then, kind of sit in the background a little bit. And that's what happens with him. Chandler, I think, is finally healthy, but Chandler's not one of your guys. He is never going to be a guy that's going to bruise in the paint, that's going to be able to push people out, that's going to be able to box people out. That he's not that guy. I think we've seen it with KO. Bouncy as all hell, but there's not much else outside of that in terms of his game right now. And thankfully he's here under Penny and can learn and can get better, but it's going to be tough to see him get meaningful minutes if he can't catch the ball, Christian. Like if he can't catch the ball, it's going to be tough to see him get meaningful minutes.
Right.
So all that to say, I still think the front court is going to be the question mark every game for me as they start to get deeper into the season. How is Penny going to kind of cover up some of the faults that he has with that front court? And I think one of the biggest ways he's going to do that is he's going to continue to lean on DeAndre to stay out of foul trouble. If DeAndre can stay out of foul trouble, then it's going to cover up a lot of the faults that front court has. If he gets into foul trouble and then they have to start relying on Malcolm and Chandler and KO more, it's going to be a rough game. So I still don't think any questions have been answered. I think some of those questions are still there. Just thankfully in these first three games, DeAndre hasn't gotten himself into foul trouble, and he's been able to play a large portion of the front court minutes and just kind of filled in the gap with somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, that's where we're at with it, is just we'll see, because we don't know yet. We haven't seen Memphis play an offensively dominant big that is physical. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't seen that big guy that's going to just come down low and impose his will all night against Memphis yet. So it's like, where's the response there? What does it look like? Does DeAndre get in foul trouble, or does Malcolm kind of step up to the task? Because, we've talked about this every single year for the most part. Memphis has had that enforcer, whether it be Precious or Musa Cisse or Jaylen Duren. Like, they've had that guy that's going to be physical and will kind of set the tone, and they don't have that yet this year. And Malcolm could come out and have a really good year and be, dominant defensively in those games. We don't know. We can't say what's going to happen. But I'm with you. It's a weakness, and how do you cover that deficiency if it's exposed, if and when it's exposed? Because I believe it, it could certainly happen at any time. And it's like, how do you make up for that? Because, having Chandler Lawson as a small ball 4 or 5, that's not going to cover for it. If DeAndre is in foul trouble, there's really nothing you can do to cover for it, because KO is not that physical presence down low, and Malcolm's really your only enforcer type on the team. So if he's not playing well, or DeAndre's in foul trouble, then I don't see a good way to go about the front court if you're playing against a team with dominant big men. Because if you're not, then you can go small ball. But if you are playing that team, then it's gonna be difficult.
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. Are we talking about on the defensive side of the ball or the offensive side of the ball? Because I don't think the Tigers' offense is designed to be a dominant in the post. You don't need that.
I'm talking strictly defensively, because I don't think that's an issue offensively. I think defensively is where I'm kind of focused on this.
Well, so here's my thought process on that. I think that's where the greatest thing that Penny did in this offseason was hiring Frank Haith. Is you've got a defensive-minded coach in Frank Haith alongside the defensive-minded head coach in Penny Hardaway. You mold those two things together, and I think that they're going to – one of the things we know about Penny is that he's not going to allow his defense to be to be manipulated in a way that shows off their weaknesses like that. Think about this. He played with Tyler Harris for 2 years when Tyler Harris is the biggest narrative about Tyler Harris was that he was going to get exposed on defense. And there were moments that, yes, he was outmatched. He was getting boxed out. He was going up against guys that were much taller, but Penny Hardaway was able to manufacture his defense or to manipulate his defense in such a way that Tyler Harris didn't get exposed. It wasn't like 7 possessions down the floor every single time Tyler Harris was getting posted up, or he was getting like Quentin Grimes was taking it in the post and just laying it up. That never happened because Penny is a defensive minded coach like that. So my thought process on the defensive side of the ball is I think that they're going to be able to create a defensive identity to where the things that they could be exposed, that could be exposed, their lack of physicality, their, maybe not having the size that they need. I think Penny and Coach Frank Haith are going to figure out a way to minimize that and maximize the other parts of their defense, the long guards, the big guards, the active hands, those kinds of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about the last 2 games. Let's move forward to Thursday night and what we're kind of looking at over the Thanksgiving weekend, Thanksgiving holiday with this Memphis basketball team at the ESPN Invitational. So their first game is Thursday night. They got the night game on Thanksgiving against Seton Hall, 6:30, and they either play Oklahoma or Nebraska on Friday. So that's kind of what we're looking at for Thursday, Friday. It's kind of hard to project past that because you don't really know which way the wins and losses go. But what are we looking for this week and into the weekend, into the Thanksgiving holiday? What are we looking for from this team? Because in the bracket, you've got Florida State, Siena, Ole Miss, Stanford, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Memphis, and Seton Hall. So you really don't have any teams, but these are all quality opponents for the most part. You have a lot of quality teams that you will have to play throughout the weekend. So what do you want to see from this team? What are you kind of expecting from this team going into this tournament?
It's definitely interesting because I really don't know a whole lot. I have not seen any of the teams play this year that they're going to be playing up against. I think I watched Ole Miss play a little bit, but I've not seen Seton Hall. I don't know. I don't really know much about Oklahoma, Nebraska just yet. I've not seen Oklahoma play. I would love to see them come out and go 2-1 in this invitational. Obviously you want to see them continue to build on this Seton Hall game or on this VCU game. Some of the things that they did really, really well. I am slightly concerned that we're going to be possibly missing Alex Lomax for the Seton Hall game. He was, and Penny even talked about it post game, definitely feeling some soreness in his legs that might not just be a soreness. It could be, possibly needing to sit out some time. So in terms of what I expect to see, I want to see the Tigers come out and continue to do what they've been doing against Vanderbilt and against VCU. And I want to see a dominant Kendric Davis, because here's the thing. What I love about these ESPN games is that they're going to be on ESPN. They're going to be live, they broadcast live to a national audience. And so if they can come out and show out well, then I think we can really start to see some momentum for the Tigers going into a pretty brutal December, like we discussed last week.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with talking about Kendric Davis here, because this is like the prime opportunity for an offensive player to have a good weekend. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's prime time, it's ESPN, but also you get to play in that tournament and that tournament style atmosphere, which I think that's when we see offensive players catch the most firepower. Like if you start hot, you're probably going to stay hot throughout the weekend, which is going to make Memphis a hard team to beat. So that is, to me, that's the key, is Kendric Davis starting fast. Because if you start fast in that first game, if he has a good game against Seton Hall on Friday night, then that could carry over throughout the rest of the tournament.
Right.
And I think winning 2 games, like you said, is big, whether that's on the front end or the back end. Just getting 2 wins in this tournament is big because they're quality opponents, like I mentioned. But you want to see You want to see that offense kind of take a little bit more of a step, after a
Absolutely.
really good game again. It's just been inconsistent so far, right? Like you have a solid game against Vanderbilt, a good game against St. Louis, then kind of take a step back against VCU. So we just, we want to see more consistency. Kendric Davis coming off his best game of the season against VCU. Can he keep that up, and can he elevate that throughout the weekend? I think that's really going to be the story of the tournament for Memphis. If that happens, then you're looking at a really good weekend. If he comes out flat and doesn't have a great tournament, then you're probably not looking at a great weekend for Memphis. So that's really what my thoughts are on that.
Real quick
Seton
question
Hall, that
for
first
you.
game.
Real quick question for you. Outside of DeAndre and Kendrick, we know those two guys are going to be the main focal points for, the Tigers offense. What player do you think you're interested to see take a step forward? Maybe one of the new guys, maybe, an older guy that's been on the team for a minute. Like what player are you saying, man, if this guy can have a breakout game against Seton Hall in this ESPN Invitational, it can kind of set the Tigers, more like ahead for the rest of the season?
I want to see a number 3 option, right? So like we know what we've got with Kendric Davis and DeAndre Williams, and Elijah McCadden and Keontae Kennedy look like they're both kind of jockeying for that third option right now. To me, that's what it looks like. I know they haven't necessarily had huge stats, but it looks like Penny wants one of those guys to step up offensively and be the third option. And I think this weekend is a good time. I think it takes time to see things like that, especially with new guys on a team. But this weekend is that first, like I said, tournament style that you get to see this team play multiple days in a row. And those usually are times when some of this stuff, and when somebody can break out of that mold or get more comfortable because there are more games in a row. So I want to see one of those guys become the number 3 option, step up. And like I said, we've seen inconsistencies. Both of them have had moments throughout the first 3 games. But if one of those guys can step up and give consistent offense for this team throughout the season, that changes Memphis's offense, because you can't key in on Kendric Davis as much on the perimeter, and you can't key in on DeAndre Williams as much down low. So that's kind of my biggest thing with this game, is seeing if they can get that number 3 guy, or it might just be the Kendric Davis show all weekend.
Hey, you know what we're going to see on Thursday? One of your favorites is going to playing for Seton Hall. We get to see your old buddy Alexis Yetna. He plays for Seton Hall. He's a graduate senior.
Speaking of dominant big men.
Speaking of dominant big men, I have a feeling that could be a Malcolm Dandridge game where he goes up against Alexis Yetna. I think they've had some battles before.
Yeah, they've seen plenty of each other over the years. So you're probably right. We'll probably see a lot of minutes from Malcolm, because Alexis Yetna is, man, he's just the lunch pail guy, right? Like he's just going to come in and swing elbows and play physical and go down low. I love watching Alexis Yetna play. So that's a tough matchup.
Absolutely.
What else was I about to say to you? Oh, Seton Hall. So you were talking about Seton Hall. Memphis currently, there's not currently a line out for the game. Memphis, I think, has a 62% chance according to ESPN's BPI. So Memphis looking like they will be the betting favorite in this game. Doesn't really mean it doesn't mean anything, but it's better to be the favorite than the underdog, I guess. I mean, at least somebody thinks you're going to win. That's how I always look at it. But right. At least somebody thinks you're going to win. Anything else on that game or on this weekend that you have? I want to hit football real quick. Talk about this SMU game a little bit before we sign off.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. I want to see the Tigers. I love these invitationals. I love when players, they have this opportunity to play 2 or 3 games in a row. Kind of gets you seasoned and ready for conference play, conference tournaments, things like that, NCAA tournament. So I'm excited. I really do. I expect the Tigers to put together good showings for themselves out there in Orlando. So that's my final thought on ESPN Invitational.
All right, let's talk a little bit of football before we get out of here. Memphis beat North Alabama pretty bad.
That was something.
That was pretty bad. It's kind of what you expect. I think Memphis was a 33-point favorite, so they covered pretty heavily. That is one of the least talented football teams I've ever seen in my entire life.
Christian, UNA didn't even have their name on their jersey.
No, it was bad. Like, I've never seen North Alabama play, but it was rough. It was really rough. So there just really isn't too much to go with there. Like we said, we can hit some of the high points, but it's pretty much what we expected from the UNA Memphis game. And I kind of want to shift gears now to it's the biggest game of the year, the SMU game. 2 6-5 teams in Dallas. SMU is currently 4.5-point favorites, which I'm a little surprised by that. I thought SMU was going to be favored by a little bit more, but I do think Memphis can beat this team. So I do understand it. Even though they're on the road, even though SMU is always a tough game, I think Memphis can win this game. I'm not saying they're going to, but they can win this game.
Were you
what
surprised?
do you think, Kenny?
Were you surprised by how badly Tulane smashed SMU this past week?
Tulane is a horrible matchup for SMU. Like, styles make fights, and Tulane is a bad matchup for SMU. Just with the way that their defense plays, the way that they're able to control the ball, the way that if you do not convert and they get you behind the sticks, then you're in trouble, and that's kind of what we saw. So I'm not overly shocked. I thought Tulane was going to win. I didn't necessarily think they were going to blow them out of the water like they did. But I'm not surprised. It was a bad matchup for SMU. But I don't think we see the same thing this weekend. I don't think Memphis is going to go blow the doors off of SMU. I think it's going to be – I was going to say I think it'll be Memphis' best game of the year, but it's hard to beat that Houston game just from a – zoom it out, just from a perspective of a non-Memphis – like if you're not a Memphis fan watching that game, that was a very fun and exciting game down to the end. But I think this has a chance to be like that prototypical SMU-Memphis game that we've seen over the past few years. Just a lot of fun, some offense, some high-level offensive plays, and opportunistic defense is what it always comes down to, it feels like, in the SMU game. Whatever defense can make the splash plays, whatever defense can make a fourth down stop or get an interception in crunch time, is typically the team that wins this game, and I expect a lot of the same. So I am excited about the Memphis SMU game. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and going 7-5 is a lot better than 6-6, I think.
My question to you is, do you see, if you look at the box score from the UNA game, and I know it was in the fourth quarter against a really bad UNA defense, but we saw Andarius Coffey come in. We saw Sutton Smith get the start. Some of the younger guys that are, when you saw them play in the preseason, you would say they were probably the shiftiest, fastest guys on the team from the running back position. Do you think we're going to see the same Javion Ducker and Asa Martin back up, or do you think, or running back, by committee, or do you think we might see some more Sutton Smith and Darius Coffey?
That one can go either way, because they could stick to the Asa Martin and Javion Ducker, but do they want to spice it up a little bit? That's what it comes down to. Like, do you want to mix it in a little bit? I love what we saw from Andarius Coffey and Sutton Smith. Andarius is a player that I've heard rave reviews about since he got on campus, and I know it took him a minute to find a home for him. He played DB for a while, switched to running back to DB, so he's been back and forth between the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Maybe had some knick-knack injuries in there as well that have kept him off the field. But I love his upside. Him and Sutton Smith look like the two most explosive running backs we've seen from Memphis this year. I know Jay Ducker had a solid game, but it's like he doesn't have that second gear that Sutton and Andarius have. They are a little more bendy, a little more shifty, a little quicker. And I don't see why you wouldn't get them involved, because I know Asa Martin's been heavily involved in the receiving game this year, but these are two guys that you can get in space and let them go to work. Aces have been more of like deeper routes for running backs that he's had production off of. And these guys are guys that you can throw screens to, they can throw angle routes to, that you can throw out routes to out of the backfield. And if you get them in space and you scheme it that way, then they can make big plays. So I don't know why we wouldn't see them more. It makes sense. I think, you're going to have to compete with a high-level offense in SMU that can put up points. So put guys on the field that can make plays, at least scheme it in a little bit. They don't necessarily have to get 15 or 20 carries or anything like that, but give them some touches. I think both of them need probably 5 to 10 touches apiece. I spread the backfield out. They've done it all year. They've spread the backfield out a lot. Let Jay Ducker be your early down back, and then mix in Asa and Sutton and Andarius Coffey, because these guys can make those big plays that this Memphis offense has been lacking this year. And I know there have been some, but it's not at the clip that any Memphis fan is used to. And I know it's the last game, so we don't have time to make up for all those non-big splash plays. But if they can get some in this game and beat SMU, I think that is a very, very good thing for this football team. And I think, and Darius Coffey and Sutton Smith can be a big part of that.
Do you think this needs to be is this going to be a kind of whoever has the ball last kind of win, whoever has the ball last will win the game kind of a game? Or do you think that, can Memphis stop Tanner Mordecai? Can they get enough stops in the game to be able to hold them down? Because what we've seen is the Tigers offense has been explosive at times, but they seem to be this year more of a grinded out, like just slow play, like longer drives kind of an offense. And that's just not the way that SMU is. So they're going to have to get some stops. But do you think it's going to be one of those things where can Memphis keep up offensively to outscore SMU, or are they going to have to get a bunch of stops?
They're going to have to control the clock and get stops. I don't think they can score at the same clip and with the same quickness that SMU can score with. And like I was saying earlier, I think it comes down to which defense does make that stop, which defense stands up the most, and also, like I said, for Memphis to control the clock. Like you said, they have tried to play more of a grinded out type system this year, and they haven't been incredible at it just because it's not something that these guys have done before. But we've seen moments where it looks good and where they've been able to can control clock a little bit. So if they can do that in this game, if they can rely on some of those running backs, if they can rely on the short game, if they can keep in front of the chains and not get into, second and third and longs, and they stay away from penalties offensively, that's going to help their defense a lot, because you do not want Tanner Mordecai hitting Rashee Rice for 80 yards and then you go on offense and you go 3 and out. That's when the game can get out of hand. So you have to keep that at bay. You have to keep the defense off the field, give them some rest, allow them some time to make some of those splash plays. And then on offense, choose some clock and wear their defense out. And like I said, defensively, you need some stops. You need to get pressure on Tanner Mordecai. You have to get pressure in his face. But what's sketchy about that is if you bring blitzes, you got Rashee Rice, who's one of the top receivers in the country, and you don't want him getting a lot of one-on-one looks, because he will burn you at every level of the field, whether that's in the short game, intermediate, or deep game. He's a very good receiver. It seems like SMU always has at least one of these guys over the last several years. Danny Gray is one that comes to mind. There was James Prochet a few years ago. And there's one, I think there's one more that I'm missing, but they've just had really, really good wide receivers, and Rashee Rice is the next one of those. So keeping him under control, getting pressure on Tanner Mordecai, getting some stops, and maybe getting a couple of lucky bounces, whether that be, tip balls going up for interceptions or fumbles bouncing the right way. Those are some of the things that I think Memphis has to do to win this game.
They can go into a bowl game 7-5 and win that bowl game. We talked about this last week, man. The confidence, the momentum, I think, for this team, especially as they go into an offseason where they lose a bunch of high quality, like seniors and veteran players, but they hopefully bring back some talented young kids that are able to capitalize on that momentum. It's going to be a big week for the Tigers, a fun game, I think. Okay,
Kenny, so you got anything else on Memphis football, Memphis basketball, ESPN Invitational, SMU, any other thoughts you have on anything?
It's a fun time of the year. It's getting cold here in Memphis. Football season's finishing up. Basketball season's getting underway. A lot of sports is happening. Big shout out to the women's soccer team. Big shout out to the men's soccer team. Let's keep it going, man. Memphis sports is on the up right now.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to check out this podcast, if you want to check out the video version, head over to YouTube, subscribe, leave us a comment, say something nice about Kenny. He loves a little bit of encouragement. or if you were or if you want to check out the podcast, you can get it wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe, rate us, leave us some stars, leave us a comment. And we are just getting started on this journey. Excited. Obviously, this is only episode 2, so a lot more coming, and that starts next week when we will see you back for episode 3.
Thank you for listening to On the Bluff. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and a comment wherever you download your podcasts. head over to www.bluffcitynil.com, where you will find comprehensive coverage of Tiger athletics and how you can become a contributor. We'll see you back here next week.